Let's take a look now at Stores C, which is the next iteration of our migrated application. I'm going to go ahead and rebuild and run this so we can see what kinds of changes have been made, what kind of choices have been made for this program now. Well, you can see we've made what looks to be quite a few changes in terms of the look and feel of the application. I think I'll slide that over. But really some very simple changes. So we're going to look in the code at a couple of things. The change to the toolbar. We've actually taken additional actions and placed them all up in the toolbar, and you'll notice that we've made a choice of icons that are different than the standard or default icons. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We also added a simple top menu here, which we could expand upon. And then the form itself we have modified to put the fields into folder tabs. So we have some placeholder folder tabs here, etc. So at this stage, we're really starting to play around with the user interface and get some ideas of how we might want the final application to look. Now, I'll tell you up front that we make some additional changes down the line, and the program doesn't end up looking quite like this. But this particular section is important to know just how we've done this and how we might start thinking through some of these graphical user interface choices. All right, so let's go ahead and exit this and look at some of those things. Let's first close out these files from our prior group, and let's first take a look at the form. One thing you'll notice that's different between the form in our Stores B group or project here and our Stores C project is that we have what's called cusform as a .4fd. A 4fd is a form designer file. What that means is that we imported our per file into the form designer tool, and we now have this visual, very nice visual representation of the form in the form designer tool. So once we've imported it, then we can go ahead and add different elements such as folder tabs, such as making changes to particular fields or labels. So let's take a look over here in the properties. We can see that this is the owner name, and let's just go ahead and pull up the properties for that. There's the text. We'll go and view the properties, and let's just sort of pull that right off of there and take a look at that. Each of the fields that we choose has various properties, and now we have this property panel that we can use to set those properties how we wish. The folder tabs themselves are very easy to work with. We can add pages, edit the text, etc. We can also add all of the various properties for folder tabs, including the action associated with a folder tab. So what this means is if you wanted a particular action to be triggered when the user selects a folder tab, you would put the name of that action there. And then in your code, you would have the onAction statement, which would be triggered and would go ahead and execute whatever code it is that you wanted to have there. There's also, lots of other properties here that you can set with the folder tabs. The other thing I want you to notice is, let's close that again, is the form structure. When you read in a per file into the form designer, it's really one of your first looks at seeing how hierarchical the form itself is. So notice that we have the overall layout, we have a page control with a first page, which we have a first folder page, a layout container called that's of type grid. And a grid container is just like your formatted screen region that you would be familiar with in a per file. And then all of the various fields that are within that grid. And then notice that on the next level to the customer maintenance, we have our next folder and on down the line. And as we expand this, we can see the hierarchy. The reason this is important is when you look at a compiled form file, which is a 42F file. It's really simply a translated file, and this hierarchy is written out into XML, and when you load the form, or when you use open window with form or open form display form, you're actually loading into memory that XML that is representing your user interface. So this starts to give you an idea of how this form is structured in the hierarchy that is there. One other thing that's important about Form Designer is it does give you the ability to preview the form. So as you're starting to think through the user interface with so many new choices to make, it can be very helpful to preview your form without having any, worrying too much about the code piece of it. And you can do a lot of prototyping to determine what the best user interface is going to be for your application. The last thing I'll mention is that you may have seen in the properties that many of these widgets have a property called hidden. And the hidden property allows you to hide either by default a field or an entire layout container, and then set that attribute back for it to be shown while you're running the program. So it's just one example of how you can interact with the memory representation of the user interface. In other words, directly modify the interface at runtime programmatically. So you may have a function or some code that when the user triggers an action, it shows a particular section of the form, or it hides a particular section of the form, or enables or disables a set of actions. And so these are all settings that you'd be setting for the initial form state, and then of course you can make changes to those, and we'll take a look at some examples in an upcoming tutorial. That concludes looking at Form Designer. The next thing we'll take a look at is our Stores D application and how we modified the toolbar and top menu among some other new changes.